We turn now to Ohio Republican Congressman Mike Turner. Good morning. Good to have
Good
you
morning.
here.
Thanks for having me.
A lot to get to with you. I want to ask you about this breaking news that President Trump fired 15 inspectors general. Those are the federal watchdogs who monitor for waste, fraud, and abuse. He didn't give 30 days notice as legally required. Does this concern you that these agencies can't police themselves?
Well, this is very common that there's turnover when a new president comes in to do a review of what's happening in these agencies and in the IGs. I think there'll be a review as they put these individuals back, and some of the individuals will be replaced, obviously. But clearly they need to bring in their own team. They need to look at what the performance is for these individuals, and it's very common as new administrations come in that specifically these positions be replaced.
So you're not concerned these are just going to be loyalists?
Well, every administration replaces them. So in the end, they tend to be. I mean, what I have seen, and I think what we have seen throughout all administrations, that these tend to be incredibly professional individuals that really are great watchdogs. And I think we'll see that from this administration.
What should happen now that the CIA has released this low confidence assessment that it was most likely a lab leak, a research experiment, versus a naturally occurring virus that resulted in the COVID pandemic?
Well, the Biden administration really has been an impediment to getting to the answer here. Congress passed.
This is their finding.
Right, but Congress passed and the Biden administration signed an order declassifying the information concerning the lab leak theory and the issues with respect to COVID origins. And the administration still refused to release it. I think this is a great start.
Yeah.
And really, it's been unfortunate that the administration has been slow. It's a good turning point because clearly this was not of natural origins.
We have more to talk about on the China front on the other side of this break, so stay with us, and we hope all of you will as well. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We return to our conversation now with Ohio Republican Congressman Mike Turner. Just to pick up on the topic of China, we've been talking about TikTok. The law stated that January 19th, and the Supreme Court upheld this, that the owner, ByteDance, would have to sell TikTok to an American owner. Inauguration Day, January 20th, the CEO of TikTok, whose company is deemed a national security threat under U.S. law, was seated next to Tulsi Gabbard, the pick to run the intelligence community. Despite this national security law. You can see the picture of him right there. And Mr. Trump seems to have given them a reprieve. The editorial board of the Wall Street Journal said Mr. Trump's TikTok order shows a Biden-like disdain for limits on his power. What do you make of this decision not to implement the law for at least a period of time?
Well, let's be clear. TikTok is absolutely a national security threat. The law passed by Congress that came out of the House China Select Committee that was chaired by Michael Gallagher that drafted this law found that TikTok was a national security risk because of two things: its access to data and its ability to use itself as a propaganda tool by China itself, and the laws in China that allowed China to compel TikTok to manipulate itself, both its data and its access to China and its use of propaganda. The Supreme Court upheld this. It remains a national security threat. And because of that, the United States Congress, the law that is the law of the land, says that ByteDance needs to divest itself. Now, the only thing that would protect the United States and protect our citizens is divestiture.
Meaning sell it.
And that means that ByteDance needs to divest itself. Now, Elon Musk has said something very interesting. He said, of course, he's noted that Twitter, his ex, does not have access to China. And that's sort of an admission by China as to what they're doing with TikTok. They won't let Twitter or X in, almost an admission as to what they're doing. Also, ByteDance have said, well, we won't sell it. Another admission that it's really not a business. This is a propaganda tool, is an access to data.
But Donald Trump's not convinced of that because he issued an executive order saying he'll figure out a deal.
Well, he has said, and we certainly hope that he gets a deal that recognizes the issue of national security,
But
because
there
there
was
is
over
no
200
role.
days to come to that deal.
There is no role in
They're
which
not selling.
there is no role. That's what they've said. There is no role in which they can remain active, in which China can have access to this data. Let me give you just two examples. And by the way, I commend to people the Supreme Court decision, because it lays out in incredible detail the national security threat. If the app is on your phone, they have access to the data on your phone. And President Trump,
Outside of that app.
outside of that app, and even the threat is to the access that your phone has to other app and other data, and that's why governments have prohibited the app being on government phones, U.S., U.K., and India has banned the whole app in its country. And then, of course, there's the propaganda aspect of how this can be manipulated. Romania just set aside its entire presidential election because of concerns that TikTok has manipulated data and propaganda with respect to its presidential election. Grave concerns as to what can be done with this, with TikTok.
I want to ask you as well about what's happening on Capitol Hill. You've been on this program many times as chair of the House Intelligence Committee. Speaker Johnson ousted you from that position as chair recently. What can you share with us about the conversation you had and the explanation, because you run it in a bipartisan way?
Yes, and I think certainly bipartisanship is incredibly important. And after I had the conversation with the Speaker, you and I spoke.
Yes.
The Speaker related, certainly, as we discussed, that an element included concerns from Mar-a-Lago. He's since walked that back. President Trump's staff has been in touch with me.
He finally denied it.
President Trump staff has been in touch with me and said that was not the case. The one thing that he has said is that he wanted to take the committee in a different direction. I'm a little concerned because his different direction indicates, pursuing the elusive deep state. And my concern is the focus should be on the committee of national security, which is what my focus has been, and state actors, non-state actors, those individuals who want to do our country harm. There certainly are bad actors and people that we need to pursue, and we certainly have done so where we find that there are laws that need to be changed to pursue people, to criminalize bad actions. We certainly have done that. But there are people every day who get up in the intelligence community who work hard to make certain that China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran are prevented from doing Americans harm. And we need to focus on how we can work together to make certain we protect our country.
Because protecting the safety of Americans is a fundamental responsibility. But just to button one thing up, when you say the White House and Mar-a-Lago said that's not the case, they didn't ask for you to be replaced.
Correct.
Are you saying the Speaker lied?
I'm not going to say that. I have the Speaker and I have a good relationship. The Speaker has at this point appointed me to lead the NATO Parliamentary Assembly on behalf of the House. I remain on the Armed Services Committee. I'm going to remain with a strong role in national security, and I'm going to continue to focus on national security and on protecting the country.
The new chair has voted against Ukraine aid. When you say the mission is pursuing the elusive deep state, what does that mean? Weaponizing the committee?
We'll have to see as to what direction that they go. I know that that's a concern.
Going after the Intelligence Committee.
I know that that's going to be a concern. We'll have to see what direction they go. I do know that national security is going to continue to be an area of concern. It certainly was my focus.
So you are concerned that the oversight in the congressional branch of the intelligence community will not happen and will instead be focused in a politicized way? Is that what I hear you saying?
I know that my focus was national security, and that's going to continue to be my focus in Congress.
Very quickly.
And we'll have to stay tuned for the rest.
Very diplomatic. Before I let you go, Donald Trump pulled security details from those who face active threats from Iran, including the former CIA director and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Would you ask him to reconsider that?
Well, obviously, I'm very concerned for Mike Pompeo.
All right. Mike Turner, thank you for your time. We'll be right back. We're joined now by Colorado Democratic Congressman Jason Crow. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
There is so much news this week. And I want to just pick up, though, on the conversation about January 6th that we had with the vice president. You've spoken about your experiences that day in very, very vivid terms. You talked about helping other lawmakers shelter They were fearing for their lives. To help them put on gas masks. It's a picture of you that day, even fighting your way out of the chamber since you had combat experience. What's your response to the Vice President's defense of pardoning some of these violent offenders?
Well, I don't want to hear Donald Trump or J.D. Vance or anyone else in this administration talk about backing the blue, talk about supporting law enforcement when they just released over 1,000 cop beaters, people who brutally beat our law enforcement. I was there. I saw it firsthand. America saw it firsthand. The video is available for anybody to view. The brutality, the injuries, over 150 of these officers still have injuries, several of whom lost their lives because of the injuries and trauma incurred on that day. We even had the Fraternal Order of Police come out and issue a statement condemning the pardons. So clearly they're not interested in supporting law enforcement. This was a political decision and a really repugnant one at that.
I want to ask you more about that, but I have to address the elephant in the room, too, because Monday, hours before leaving office, Joe Biden, then still president, preemptively pardoned his own siblings and their spouses, even though they have not been charged with any crimes. Senator Tim Kaine said the decision makes it harder for Democrats to stand on the high ground and make a critique of the Trump pardons. Do you agree it muddies moral clarity?
No, what I think happens here is that it shows very clearly the decision of an outgoing president to try to protect his family when you have an incoming president and those around him who are repeatedly threatening his family, right? That is the story here, that you have Donald Trump who has doubled down, who has tripled down on threats against Joe Biden, on threats against outgoing administration officials simply for doing their job in many cases. This is a president, President Trump, who continues to threaten political opponents and is making every move right now in the early days of his administration to try to put in motion things to go after and to use the force of government now to go after his political opponents.
I hear you on concerns about retribution, but you were plain spoken when Joe Biden pardoned his son Hunter, who had been convicted of multiple crimes. And in fact, you said in very clear terms, you thought that it did create problems.
Yeah,
for
in that
Democrats.
instance, I did. I thought that there was a conflict of interest that undermined the integrity of the process. And what I would like to see overall is pardon reform. Very clearly, there needs to be some guardrails put in place and some reform of the pardon process. And I think most Americans would agree with this to make sure that it's not misused, because a lot of this is about the perception of America. People need to know that the person sitting in the Oval Office has their best interests in mind at all times. And certainly not with Donald Trump right now can they have that feeling of trust and confidence, because in 5 days into this administration, the abuse is already rampant.
To go back to January 6th, because there are comparisons being made, and I hear your point on pardon reform, which is basically saying presidents need guardrails on this stuff, even if they're Democrats. But one of the people pardoned by Donald Trump was Stewart Rhodes. He was released from an 18-year prison sentence for conspiring to violently stop Congress's role in the transfer of power. He was at the Capitol this Wednesday after receiving a pardon. This is a man who was recorded having said in 2021 that he wished he had brought rifles on January 6th, and he spoke about hanging Nancy Pelosi. How do you make sense of that? How do lawmakers make sense of that? And are you concerned about political violence, not specific necessarily just to him, but that this encourages more of that?
Yeah, well, I'm sitting here last week in my office on Capitol Hill, and I turn on the TV and I see that a couple of floors below me, Stewart Rhodes, as you mentioned, one of the heads of an armed militia group in America, is having coffee at the Dunkin' Donuts in the basement of my office building. So of course I felt uncomfortable about that, as did most of my colleagues. And I'm very focused on public safety. I always have been in this job. And you just cannot tell me that releasing militia leaders, insurrectionists, criminals back onto the street because it's what you did to placate your political base is making us any more safe, right? In an era of political violence, of extremism, where threats against members of Congress have quadrupled in the last couple of years, none of this is making us safe. It's actually creating an environment that gives permission to extremists to be more bold, to assert themselves. And we're going to see more of this.
I want to switch to what's happening in Colorado. Aurora, Colorado is in your district. That is a location that President and candidate Trump talked quite a lot about, specifically as an example of immigration run amok. He talks about this migrant Venezuelan gang, TDA, taking over parts of your city, something local officials have pushed back on, certainly. They were designated as a terrorist group by President Trump, or he started the process to designate them. What does that do for the people of Aurora?
Well, you know, I pushed back pretty fiercely on Donald Trump's lies because this is my hometown. I live there, and I can tell you that Aurora, Colorado is a place of great pride and great strength. We are a community of immigrants and refugees. Nearly 20% of my constituents were born outside of the United States. These are our business owners. These are our friends. They go to school with my children. They work in our community. They grow businesses in our community. And the rhetoric of Donald Trump, both on the campaign trail and now, demonizing these folks and telling gross lies and exaggerations, is not only impugns the reputation of a strong and vibrant community, but it makes those folks less safe. And I will stand up over and over again and push back against those lies.
Okay.
At the same time, it does nothing to advance the cause of comprehensive immigration reform, which we desperately need.
Yeah.
Right?
Well.
Anybody knows that our system is badly broken, and Donald Trump is not making the moves to fix it.
All right. Jason Crow, Congressman, thank you for your time. We'll be back in a moment. This ceasefire deal in the Middle East appears to be holding, though portions are delayed. 4 female Israeli soldiers held captive by Hamas were released yesterday, along with 200 Palestinian prisoners held by Israel. If the deal holds, 2 American hostages are expected to be released in the coming weeks. The cartels. Returning to the subject of immigration, we're joined now by CBS immigration and politics reporter Camilo Montoya-Galvez, who is arguably the busiest person in the entire CBS bureau right now. Camilo, I want to have you bottom line some things. I understand you have new reporting about some of the plans for migrants being deported.
That's right. We can report that the Trump administration is currently working on striking an asylum agreement with the country of El Salvador to deport migrants from different countries across Latin America to the small country in Central America. This would be a so-called safe third country asylum agreement that would empower U.S. immigration officials, Margaret, to deport non-Salvadorian migrants to El Salvador with instructions to seek asylum there and not in the U.S. Importantly, I am told that one plan under consideration, it would allow the U.S. to deport Venezuelan Tren de Aragua gang members to El Salvador and have that country house them or detain them. And that would obviously be a significant development and breakthrough potentially for the administration because, as you know, Venezuela right now currently does not accept U.S. deportations. And so the administration is moving aggressively and quickly to really oversee a sweeping crackdown on immigration. We have seen the president invoke sweeping constitutional powers to essentially shut down the asylum system at the border. And he is also enlisting the vast resources of the military to really enhance immigration enforcement, not only deploying more troops, but using military planes to deport migrants. And yes, there have been so far 1,500 troops deployed to the border, but one internal Customs and Border Protection memo we obtained, Margaret, shows that that number could rise to as many as 10,000 active duty troops.
There's so much that you just laid out there. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is expected to go to El Salvador in the coming days, so I imagine it's related to the news you just broke here. And TDA is the gang we were just talking about with the congressman as well. In terms of how the U.S. military is being used, President Biden left 2,500 U.S. troops at the border. So what's actually different now that there's an extra 1,500?
Well, the work is not changing. What is changing is the number of troops on the ground. They are still assigned to do logistical and operational work and to assist Customs and Border Protection in an operational capacity by, for example, setting up border barriers to repel migrants from entering the country illegally and providing surveillance. They are not to be used to arrest or otherwise process migrants because, as you know, longstanding federal law prohibits the use of the military for civilian law enforcement, and that would include the enforcement of federal immigration laws.
So it's the optics, essentially, that this is...
It's a show of force by the Trump administration, rather.
And what, in terms of the changes have occurred in terms of use of military? We were hearing about lots of deportations. Now it seems we're getting reports daily of military planes carrying migrants to Guatemala.
That's right.
An attempt, apparently, to Colombia as well.
That's right. So the administration has already used military planes to deport migrants to the country of Guatemala. And overnight, it attempted to send 2 military aircraft to Colombia, sending about 160 deportees from that country to Bogota, Colombia, the capital. But we are told now that the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, objected to the use of military planes and blocked those deportations. So this shows that the administration will still face significant diplomatic challenges as it tries to oversee this aggressive immigration plan.
The Biden team was deporting to those countries. They were using civilian aircraft.
ICE charter flights, correct.
So the military planes were the problem there.
And again, it's a show of force by the Trump administration.
All right. Bottom lining it for us. Thank you, Camilo. We'll be right back. Last week was a long and dramatic one, especially for the Washington area. We asked our John Dickerson for his thoughts on just one of the many actions taken by President Trump, the pardons of the 1,500 who'd been charged for their roles in the attack on our nation's capital just over 4 years ago.
Every morning, Capitol police officers make good on their pledge to ensure that lawmakers, citizens, and the press can move safely through the Capitol. They protect an idea that in that building, passionate disputes can find peaceful resolution. Each day, their willingness to sacrifice honors this American system, whether violence comes or not. On January 6, 2021, violence came, and they answered their oath's call. Heroes emerged. The lawmakers they protected praised their bravery.
Law enforcement went in, Capitol Police and Secret Service. They bravely confronted the terrorists. They bravely removed them. They secured the Capitol.
140 officers were injured. Some sustained brain injuries, cracked ribs, and even shattered spinal discs. In the following days, one officer, Brian Sicknick, would die from his physical wounds, while 4 others would take their own lives. A plaque was commissioned to honor them. Plaques are made of metal because they are meant to be as durable as the message, "Do not forget." A plaque transforms courage and sacrifice of an instant into lessons for the future in case lawmakers lose their way. The symbols of Inauguration Day do that too. The rotunda painting of General Washington giving up power, Lincoln's Bible, acts of heroism in service of democratic ideals, nourishment from the past to the present. All serve one idea, that the voice of the people is honored through a peaceful transfer of power. On Inauguration Day, both parties applauded this. Law enforcement stood guard over the peaceful transition, but the shared commitment to what they protected proved more fragile than their watch. By sundown, the president, sanctified by those symbols and now the steward of the ideas they represent, pardoned the 1,500 rioters who had sought to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power on January 6th and overturn the vote of 81 million Americans. Among those whose crimes were erased, those who had pierced, electrocuted, and smashed police officers. The lawmakers the officers had protected offered no defense.
The president's made a decision. We move forward. There are better days ahead of us.
We're not looking backwards, we're looking forward.
In this case, the past is a nuisance, which may be why that plaque has not been hung. What message does that send to the officers who protected lawmakers on January 6th and still protect them today? Perhaps the ideas behind their pledge are not meant to be commemorated in iron after all, but have become as empty as the wall where that promised plaque was supposed to hang.
And tomorrow marks a new era at the CBS Evening News. John and our Maurice Dubois will be taking the anchor seats. I'll be joining them as needed for Washington coverage. Check your local listings and we'll see you there. And of course, I'll see you every Sunday on Face the Nation. I'm Margaret Brennan. Thank you all for watching.